John, like 30 seconds.
Okay, I just want to say that the analysis he advanced is historically obtuse and morally disoriented. The slave states took the position that the enslaved African Americans should count 100% for the purposes of reapportionment, but for those purposes only. They didn't have any civil rights, they didn't have any voting rights, they couldn't run for office, they had no civil liberties, they were property. The northern states said they should not count at all.
Reclaiming our time.
They should count zero, and they arrived at the 3/5.
Reclaiming the time.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
We're going to have a history lesson here. The gentleman from Wisconsin was making a point with respect to the oft-used 3/5 reference.
I was trying to explain what the historical
respect,
genesis of
right,
it is.
and the history of it. The gentleman from Wisconsin characterized it from his perspective, and I think it was important for me to put that on the record, and I think it's been asked and answered, and we don't need to have a history lesson on it. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with my questions. This hearing, I think, has been illuminating on a number of different levels, and I would like to ask just a sort of a simple question for the panel generally, which is very specifically, was the 2020 census accurate? Mr. Mayfield.
At the state and national level, it was within the margin of error for modern censuses. Below the state level, it was not.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Considering that it counted illegal and non-immigrant aliens, it was inaccurate according to the dictates of the Constitution.
Mr. Miller.
It was the most inaccurate census in modern times, in my opinion.
Mr. Yang.
At the state and national levels, it was accurate. At the sub-levels below that, it was inconsistent at times, but overall still did very well.
And so was it true that in 2022 that the Census Bureau itself acknowledged that there were significant errors and significant discrepancies? Is that correct, Mr. Mayfield?
That is correct.
Right. And did it have significant impact on states, and that there were undercounting and overcounting of at least 14 states? Mr. Mayfield?
That is the census position as of 2022.
Now, was it also accurate that, in fact, the undercounting was often directed towards more conservative states with more Republican representation, and the overcounting was directed towards what we might call blue states with more Democrat representation?
I can't address your use of the word direction. That is certainly what the modeling suggests was the result.
Mr. Miller, would you add to that?
Yeah, the Census Bureau would acknowledge that that would have been the outcome.
And to the tune of as many as 500,000 in the state of Texas, for example?
That's correct, costing Texas an additional congressional seat.
So let's get to the heart then of why. Like, why is that the case? We've posited here in this hearing, I've heard a number of folks represent, that one of the reasons is because of illegal immigrants. So true or false, is the issue of how we count involving illegal immigrants having a direct impact on representation in Congress? Mr. Mayfield.
That is undeniably true.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I agree, and it's been true for at least the last 3 censuses.
Mr. Miller.
It's a mathematical certainty.
Mr. Yang.
Undocumented immigrants are required to be counted under the Constitution.
Do they have a direct impact on how we apportion and how districts are getting set up?
That is less clear to me.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Yang. You posited earlier some theories about how we count people and that we should count everybody for apportionment purposes. If 75 million people were to come into the state of California between now and 2030, should we have 100 new congressional seats in California if all 75 million of those people were illegally present in the state of California?
That's the way the Constitution is currently constructed, as I understand it.
So that's how, and taking issue with that, by the way, that the Constitution requires that we apportion based on people who are here illegally, which a number of the other people on the panel have questioned, in which at no point has the Supreme Court said that that is the case. Then we're saying here, the Democrat witness is saying that if we had 75 million people illegally flood into the state of California, we must have 100 representatives, again, rounding the math there, added to the state of California. That is extraordinary to me. But I do want to follow up and finish on this question of the differential privacy. The other question that has been raised here, which is highly problematic on a less partisan basis, is the extent to which we have the Census Bureau adopting, by Mr. Mayfield's testimony, by edict of a civil servant bureaucrat at the Census Bureau, a approach to estimating and guessing the population based on something that was attacked by numerous groups, questioned by numerous groups, and is now proven to be statistically problematic, that it is actually causing massive problems with respect to our counting. Is that fair, Mr. Mayfield?
That is accurate.
Mr. Rodriguez, is that fair?
That's fair.
Mr. Miller?
We may disagree on a lot of different things, but I think there's a bipartisan consensus that this is a problem, a big problem.
And Mr. Yang, you said something to the tune of fine-tuning, but you also seem to acknowledge that there are significant problems with respect to the way this is being handled now.
As a new policy, I agree that this is something that needs to be evaluated, absolutely.
And so, Mr. Miller, you've thrown out a couple of ideas. I want to conclude on that point because I think it's really important that there are other ways to go about doing this. And swapping, you get into that. And the issue here for everybody to understand is you have laws that say you got to protect privacy. You've got a massive file that is protected at unbelievable levels of security and inability to look at the data. And so therefore, we've got to figure out how to know that we have an accurate census. And this differential privacy is raising massive concerns on a nonpartisan basis, right? A Harvard study, independent groups on the left, groups on the right. It would seem to me that we should come to a consensus on how we should approach this. Could the gentleman finish, filling in that question and that point?
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, there is a constitutional purpose for all of this. And a privacy statute cannot be a reason by which to ignore the constitutional outgrowths and outflows of what the purpose of this data is. So if we have a privacy standard that is causing, and I think most people would agree with this at this point, that is causing significant data distortion that is impacting all sorts of federal funding formulas, all sorts of potentially, definitely redistricting, potentially depending on how, if it's not everything that we believe it is, and not everything that they're purporting to say it is. In theory, it's not supposed to affect apportionment. I don't have access to the data. I can't verify that. That's how it's supposed to work. But at the end of the day, we should defer to a privacy method that is also as good and does not create as many constitutional issues as we have seen. If that is not achieved by swapping and turning off data, we need to get our smart people together and figure out another option.
And you were suggesting, closing out my time's over, of turning off the data. That was an approach you're suggesting to try to have an approach. I think, Mr. Yang, can I just ask you on a nonpartisan basis with just a little indulgence? Do you have a perspective on that? Because I saw you kind of nodding and sort of maybe almost in that kind of like intellectual chewing on it as to whether that would be an approach that might help solve the problem of managing privacy, but not having data that's problematic.
Like I said, I think this is worth evaluating, and this is part of what happens after every census, is the Census Bureau looks at what worked, what didn't. It acknowledges that mistakes are made. It acknowledges, in this case, that there are certain overcounts and undercounts. That's no different than any other census. Now the job of the Census Bureau, as with guidance from all of you, is to how to move forward and make that system even better for the next census.
All right, I thank the panel. I now know that my colleague from Texas
I would just
joined us.
seek unanimous consent.
Sure.
I mean, we've discussed the census after review quite a bit, so I'd like to seek unanimous consent to introduce the GAO report on the 2020 census coverage, errors, and challenges to inform the